To welcome my audience to the Linda Eastburn YouTube channel. And I would really appreciate it if all of you would just subscribe to the channel. That helps us keep going. It doesn't cost you anything. It's absolutely free to subscribe, and I really appreciate it when you do. My guest today is Gary Kendrick. Gary, welcome to the show.
Howdy, glad to be here.
Yes, very much so. So tell me, how did you become interested in Bigfoot?
Well, it's kind of it's pretty much a carbon copy of about everybody else's story. I grew up in the '70s and the '80s, and I started watching In Search of with Leonard Nimoy, and we saw the Patterson and Gimlin film. Uh, Boggy Creek was a big one. Well, when that booger pushed its hand through that window in Boggy Creek, that was the end of me right there. It scared me to death. And I had seen all this stuff, and I had it in my mind. Hey, these things are real. These things are real. And my real obsession started in probably about January of 2006 when I actually had one walk across the road in front of me.
Well, that
And
had to be
that's
an
when I
experience. Yeah, it would have taken you into a whole different realm with Bigfoot, seeing it in person like that. So tell me about that experience.
uh, it's kind of a funny story. I've been over it several times on my podcast, but uh, I worked for the Virginia Department of Corrections at the time, and I was on my way to pick up another guy. We were both supervisors with the Virginia Department of Corrections, and we were going to work. And he lived roughly about a half a mile on the ridge above my house. So I drove up to his house, and it was probably about 4:30 in the morning. And the funny thing was the name of the ridge where he lived at is Big Smith Ridge. Okay. But as we grew up as kids, nobody called that Big Smith Ridge up there. Everybody called it Welfare Ridge because nobody on that ridge worked at the time. And when I went to pick up this guy for work, there was only three people up there that worked then, and they all three worked at the prison. But anyway, I went up to pick him up. We started back off the ridge, and I actually had to slam on the brakes. I was driving a 2003 Jeep Wrangler Rubicon, and I had to slam on the brakes to keep from hitting this thing. And it was standing at the end of the bumper of my Jeep, and it just walked across the road in front of us. And it was absolutely massive. That's the only way I can describe it. It was head to toe covered in a like a cinnamon red colored hair, and it had really long hair from its wrists up under its arms and down its ribs a little bit. And that hair looked like it had been rolled up into dreadlocks. And the only thing I can think of is that was from arm swing. And the funny thing about it was, I had saw the Patterson and Gimlin film, and when you look at the Bigfoot in that film, everybody calls it Patty. When you look at Patty, Patty looks really apish in her face. She doesn't really look all that human, but what I saw looked remarkably more human than that. And like I said, it just walked across the road. And the guy that was in the vehicle with me, we were both kind of shocked. But I drove down the road a little bit more, and I heard something click, and I turned around and looked, and he had locked the door and was holding on to the door handle with both hands. And I said, "Hey, man, did you see that?" And he said, "I didn't see anything." And I said, "No, for real, dude, did you see that? I swear to God, if you don't tell me something, I'm going to stop this vehicle." And he said, "I seen something. I don't know what it is. I don't want to talk about it." And to this day, he don't really talk about it.
So you have two completely different experiences with our reactions to this experience.
Yeah, and it's kind of unusual, and that's kind of actually, if you want to know the truth, then I think it's the norm when it comes to a Bigfoot encounter. You have one of two reactions. Either, you're either going to be the person who is fascinated with it, needs to know more, becomes, really ultra into it, or you're the person that is scared of it and doesn't want to talk about it anymore. And I think that's the two reactions that most people have.
Yeah, it does seem that way with all the people that I've interviewed. They seem to have one of two responses. Either they don't ever go back out in the woods, they don't want to go
Mhm.
camping again, they don't want to experience that, or they become obsessed with researching. Even if they can't get out in the woods all the time, at least watching and reading and researching it in whatever capacity they have that time available to them. So how
Mhm.
did you respond? What did you do after that, after you had that sighting?
Uh, it took me a little while, but I actually found a group here in Virginia that I'm still a part of, and I actually do the podcast for that group. It's Sasquatch Watch of Virginia, and I got lucky when I first got involved in it. I got involved with some really good people: Billy Willard, Pete Wilson, and these guys actually taught me quite a bit. And Billy's kind of a mentor of mine. He's a really good guy, and it's it's just kind of took off from there. I do the podcast. I really enjoy doing the podcast.
What
But
did these guys bring to the table? What did they teach you?
uh, it was just basically the main thing that they teach you is, when you have that in Canada, and I don't, people shouldn't be ashamed of this. I'm kind of stumbling over my words, but I'm trying to think of the best way to put it. People shouldn't be ashamed of it. When you first really get into Bigfoot and you start doing your first investigations, or you first start finding your first evidence, uh, everybody freaks out when that happens. Okay, and that's fine. It's a natural reaction. It's a natural reaction. But the biggest thing that they taught me was, don't freak out. Take your time, be methodical, document the evidence. And the biggest thing is that every time a limb pops in the woods, it is not Sasquatch. And don't fall into that whole. You see it all the time on the internet. People have all these pictures, and there's 12 red circles, and they say, "Oh, there's a Sasquatch in each one of those red circles." And that's the thing too. There may honestly have been something in some of those red circles, but your perspective of the photograph is completely different than my perspective of a photograph, because she saw things prior to and after taking that snapshot with that camera that I will never see. And I may not be able to interpret what you saw from your photograph. So that was another big lesson that you taught me. And I learned a good piece of research information that I still use quite a bit today, from a guy that we did an expedition with, and he was out of a completely different group than us, and it's 4951 is what he called it. I have to be 49% sure that the information and the evidence that I'm seeing could be a hoax, but I also need to be 51% sure that it's not. And if I can't get the 51% sure that it's not, if I'm 49% sure that it's real and 51% sure that it could be fake, I won't even investigate it. So you kind of have to pick and choose, what you think, especially when it comes to an investigation on a piece of property that, you really don't have that much information on. So that's always a good piece of advice for beginners is, and like I said, I just call it the 49-51 rule. Be
Yeah,
49% sure that it's not real and 51% sure that it is real.
I think that's good advice. It makes sense to not just go out and willy-nilly, to pursue every single thing that's out there, presented to you, because there's a lot of people that go in the woods, and I'm sure you understand this. A lot of people go in the woods and they hear something, they immediately jump to a conclusion of some sort, and you never know.
Yeah, and that brings me to a real good point too, Linda. Before you go out and investigate someplace, uh, especially if you're going to go alone. research the area before you go. You kind of need to know what weather patterns are going to be like, what terrain patterns are going to be like. You need to know what wildlife is in that area. And 100% it helps to know what type of noises that the wildlife you're going to encounter makes. Because, like, particularly here at the campground where I'm at, uh, there's a lot of blue herrings here, the great blue herrings. And if you have never heard one of those great blue herrings, when it makes a call, you will think that a dinosaur is coming out of the woods after you. They have this huge booming, and it's a really strange call, and it'll scare you if you don't know what it is. But yeah, I encourage everybody, know your terrain, know your weather patterns, be prepared. Take water and food. Even if you're going on a 1 hour hike, pack a snack and pack some water with you, because that could be the difference between life and death.
Good advice too. So how often do you actually get a report, follow up on it, do some research in the area and find it's 100% what they're saying?
In my area, it's pretty tough. Uh, you know, I spoke to you earlier this week. I live in Virginia, but I'm right on the very tip end of Virginia, and we border with Kentucky. And to be honest, it's right in the middle of the Bible Belt, and people don't really talk about it uh, as much as I think they could. Which I've noticed now it's become more acceptable. But before, you know, uh, you can't really put Sasquatch into terms of, oh, it's a human, or oh, it's an animal, or we don't really know what it is. So here in the Bible Belt, that automatically made it the devil. So people didn't talk about it. But I have come up on some pretty interesting information just here locally. I took my nephew. He's 8, and he stays here at the camper with me quite a bit. And I took him to a place right here in the campground where I'm at, that some people that I knew had a pretty aggressive encounter with a Bigfoot in the 80s. And one guy ended up having to shoot at it in order for the other guys to get away. He was throwing logs at him, he was throwing sticks at him, and all this other stuff. And me and my nephew, we hiked up to where this happened at, and it's only about 300 to 500 yards from the main. Well, it's not the main campground; it's the primitive campground up into this forested area. And it's the first time he'd ever been out in the woods with me, looking for Bigfoot evidence, and we found a possible footprint. So, there's quite a bit of evidence out there. You just have to kind of got to get out there and really look for it.
Exactly. So have you run into many in the things like structures, broken trees, things of that sort?
In investigations that we've done with the group, yes, quite a few. And I'll give you an example of probably one of the strangest was we was on a property in Spotsylvania County, Virginia, and the people that owned the property had an encounter and had a first class sighting, and we went up to investigate it, and their next door neighbors said, "Hey, we've had some weird stuff happening over here too. Could you guys come over and look at that?" So we did. And as we was going through this, area of forest looking for evidence, I came across cedar trees, and there was quite a few of them. And I don't know if people realize this or not, but cedars will shed their bark naturally. But when a cedar sheds its bark naturally, it's all gathered up right at the base of the tree. It just falls off the tree onto the ground at the base of the tree. And I ran across probably 20 cedar trees that the bark was just stripped off of. And it hadn't shed naturally because it was not at the base of the tree. And it was from the ground to about, I don't know, 7 feet, maybe 8 feet off the ground, that they had all been stripped. And all the bark had been taken off of them. And It was not around the tree. It was not in the immediate vicinity. It was just gone. And I thought that was really unusual. And we hiked on a little bit farther, and we had found it was a couple of trees that had blown down. Some had blew in one direction, and some had blew in another direction. It almost made like a shelter the way they had blown down. And when we got down and looked inside of the hollow where those trees had been collapsed and lapped over top of each other, that's where all that cedar bark was. It had been piled up inside of that. And we went through it pretty methodically, looking for hair samples or anything like that, but we never really found anything in it. But it was just odd that all of that cedar bark had been carried to where those trees had been blown down and piled up inside of it.
About how far away was that from those cedar trees?
Maybe 25, 30 yards.
Okay. So it takes some doing to get all of it down there.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. It was pretty interesting.
Well, do you find that sounds like a nest of some sort to me? That's kind of like they were building something there that was maybe sort of a nest, do you think?
Yeah, that's kind of what I think too. I think, and this is just my own opinion, and everybody that does any kind of Bigfoot stuff has their own opinions. And in my opinion, I think that they do kind of use stick structures and things like that, but not necessarily as shelters. I think they might be like some type of territorial marker or boundary markers or something like that. Just some way of saying, hey, this is my territory. Don't cross.
I've heard of logs and various trees and things crossing a road or pathway, almost like as if they were saying, don't go in here. And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
even when someone is really aware that there's a clan or something in an area, they'll often walk a path, and then one day there'll be some kind of a log across that path, and it's unusual. Looks like it's been drugged there or something. It's unusual for it to be there, but they always kind of take that as a sign of, not today. Don't come in here today for some reason.
And I don't know if it's just like don't come in here today, or if it's kind of okay. You really worn your welcome out. Don't come back.
And that could be,
Uh,
yeah.
it depends entirely on kind of the circumstances, really, because it could be yeah, don't come in here today, or it could be we've seen you, don't come back. Uh, it could be any of that, and that right there is the biggest mystery in this, and that's something too. Whenever you first start studying Bigfoot, as soon as you think you have figured something out, you all of a sudden realize that you know less than what you did when you started. And it's just there is so much information out there that people interpret their own way, and everything else like that. But it's hard to it's kind of hard to put together what is good information and what's not. You'll get like and the teepee structures are probably one of the most common structures that people talk about. And they're made out of, dead trees, and they might be 3 feet high, or they might be 12 feet high, or whatever. And when it comes to something like the teepee structures, the first thing that you need to keep in mind is you can't rule out humans to start with. Now, if you come across a structure that, I'll use the Grassman structure that was discovered in Ohio. I don't know if you've heard of that or not,
I
but
haven't. Describe it to me.
it was pretty intricate. It was like an igloo that was kind of woven out of grass and sticks and things. And there was probably enough room inside of it for 3 or 4 people to lay down in it. So something like that, I can see that as being, a nest. And just to be honest with you, you're not going to have your average John out in the woods that's going to weave a structure that's big enough for 3 or 4 people to lay down inside of. You might have a hunter who will stack up some sticks to keep the wind off of them. You might have a hunter that piles up some brush so he can hide behind it. But as far as weaving a structure, like I said, the Grassman structure from Ohio, where all this grass and stuff was woven together into a big igloo shape, you're not going to have a hunter that does that. So that kind of leaves it out there. That's a pretty good indicator that that might be a Bigfoot shelter.
What do you think about the limbs that are bent over and stuck in the ground, creating an arch?
A lot of that, and I try to use a lot of science with my investigation, and just to be honest with you, that's a problem with me, and the reason it is because you know you really want to know that this is a true piece of Bigfoot evidence, and then you go out there and look at it, and then you realize that no, this tree just fell across this one, and that's what did that. But now there are some trees that are bent over, and there's another tree laying on top of it that does not appear to be natural. I have found a few things like that I can't explain as natural phenomenon. And that's another thing too. You kind of need to be aware of natural phenomenons in that area, like snow load. If you're in a place where you get a lot of snow, sometimes the trees will accumulate a lot of snow and bend in a certain way. Or if it's wind patterns, if you've had a lot of young trees that are kind of leaning over in one direction, that doesn't necessarily mean it's Bigfoot. It could be just a wind pattern. But, if you're out there and there's one tree and it's an unusual pattern and there is nothing else around like it, that's when you really kind of need to dig in and think to yourself, hey, is this really Bigfoot sign?
And have you heard of those trees that they're really odd that they're pulled up from the root and stuck upside down back in the ground? Have you heard of those?
Yeah, the Alaska has quite a few of them, and I think there's actually been some discovered here in the U.S. like that too. But I have no other explanation for what would do that. For starters, it would take a tremendous amount of physical force to do that, and it takes quite a bit of thinking too when you think about it. What other animal would think, to use that as a trail marker to turn a tree completely upside down and do that? And there's some of those trees, I think, in Alaska. They're cedar trees up in Alaska. And I think they're actually stuck in the ground like 6 or 8 feet. So, yeah, I'm pretty fascinated by that.
Yeah, if you think about what it takes to just put a fence post in the ground, the force
Yeah,
it takes for one person to, to get a fence post, a wooden fence post stuck in the ground. I mean, it's not an easy task. That's hard work.
no,
Kind of
ma'am, it is
if we
not.
like to do that with a tree.
And and like I said, too, when you look at it, you know automatically what it is. It's not anything that you can't readily identify. Here's a tree and that's roots. Why are the roots in the air? But yeah, it's really interesting. And to be honest with you, I have no other explanation for it. I have no other explanation for it because some people said that loggers did it as a joke. And just to be honest, I don't really see that because when you have these loggers are pretty serious guys and they're out there to make a living. And I don't see them taking the better part of a day to dig a hole and just bury a tree upside down just to get a laugh out of somebody.
No, that would
They
be
just
the work. You'd have to first of all pull it up, and of course they could get that job done pretty easy, I suppose. But yeah, digging a hole, putting that tree down, and then doing more than one, especially that would
yeah.
be a task.
And then too, if it was loggers, if the foreman comes by and catches you guys goofing off, we've all had jobs, okay? And if you get caught we all goof off at a job. But if the foreman comes by and catches you goofing off at a job, you're going to be in trouble. And, nobody wants to get in trouble. So I don't foresee that really being the case. I don't think it was human activity that did that. And that really doesn't leave any other, explanation other than it was some type of powerful creature that pulled those trees out of the ground and just stuck them on the ground upside down.
Yeah, it's kind of an amazing thing. So what do you think about sounds, various sounds? I've heard of people who have seen Bigfoot, had all these strange sounds, but they even have some sounds, they're way out from nowhere. This would not be a natural sound that would be happening, but it sounds almost like some kind of machinery, like a drill or jackhammer or something like that. Have you heard of that happening?
Yes, ma'am, I have. I've had the good fortune of meeting Ron Moorhead a few times. And I've got to be honest with you, for people out there that don't know Ron Moorhead recorded the Sierra Sounds back in the 1970s. And it was kind of the first recording of what, I can only explain to you as a Bigfoot language. And those recordings have been studied by cryptolinguists like R. Scott Nelson and other scientists, and they appear to be original. But I know Ron Moorhead talked about he heard a metallic sound, like a pinging, at times when they would have Bigfoot activity around. A cowbell. He said they distinctly heard cowbells, and there was no cows around. Uh, I've heard a lot of people talking about like a fence closing, and any kid that's grew up on a farm knows what it sounds like when the wind catches the fence and blows it closed. And people have reported hearing that. And just to be honest with you, I think it goes back to the Native Americans, the Indians in the United States. I'm part Native myself. I'm Cherokee and Shawnee, and the the natives here in the United States always had all kinds of stories about how Sasquatch was a mimic. It could mimic anything that it heard. And the Cherokee Indians said that there was two different kinds of Bigfoot. One hunted and preyed on the Cherokee Indians, and the other actually lived with the Cherokee Indians and was friendly with them. And they said they even taught that Sasquatch to speak some Cherokee. That it had a rudimentary understanding and was able to speak some Cherokee. So I think that comes from just Bigfoot's ability to mimic things. Uh, Another common thing too that you hear quite a bit about is uh, Bigfoot calling your name. I interviewed a guy. He was on last Monday night, as a matter of fact, and he said that he would hear his mother's voice calling his name coming from the woods, and his mother be sitting right beside of him. So I think that kind of falls back on their ability to mimic things, and I think a lot of the metallic sounds and things like that may be things that Bigfoot has heard and is just able to mimic.
That very well could be. I've heard a lot of people say that they heard sounds, disturbances, and things, and then later on, it wouldn't be there. It wasn't obviously what they thought it was. They didn't, it wasn't their campsite being destroyed or anything like that, because the next day they'd get up, go out, and it would be just fine. So something was making that sound, but it wasn't what they thought it was.
As when they were making the Sierra recordings, and it sounded like something had knocked over the stove and had just generally destroyed the outside of the camp. And they were like, "Man, I'm glad we're inside here and not out there. It's getting tore up out there." And then when they went out the next morning, that nothing had been disturbed.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I've heard that from more than one person. So it's a strange thing. And what about battery drainage? Have you ever had that happen when you're out researching?
I really and that's kind of the funny thing is I am really primitive in my research. Uh, I don't really use, infrared cameras, night vision. Uh, I'm really primitive. I'm really familiar with woods. I'm familiar with the sounds of the woods, footprints, the smells, things like that. And I don't really rely on any electronics. So honestly, I haven't myself experienced that, but I have heard other people that I've been on expedition with talk about it.
Yeah. Exactly. I've heard that quite a bit. And I know Scott Nelson said when he would go with Ron Moorhead up to the Sierra camp, he said they would get this kind of strange feeling when they knew Bigfoot was around, and they'd have a lot of activity when Bigfoot was around. And every time that happened, he said, all their batteries would just drain, completely gone. But when they would go up there and they had this feeling, they just could tell there wasn't anything going to happen. It just didn't feel like anything was in the air, nothing. Their batteries would stay solid. They didn't drain. So it was a strange thing, but they kind of knew it when in advance when it was going to happen. But I've heard of several people talk about their batteries dying.
Yeah, and like I said, I've never experienced that myself because I'll just be honest, I'm kind of primitive Pete. I take a more it's hard to explain, and I'll just be honest. Uh, I take a more primitive stance towards it because I think if you go with the intentions of I'm going to film this and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and you know you're there, those cameras make a noise. I'm pretty sure that they can see the infrared beams from like game cams or even infrared cameras, and I just don't think you will have the amount of activity. And I know for a fact that you won't have the up close activity. Uh, I think that's one of the reasons why Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin were so successful is that they used it was a manual camera. It had to be wound up in order for it to work. So there really wasn't any noise to be heard of. So I think, when I go out with just the intention of, hey, I'm on the same level playing field as you are. So if I have an encounter with one, I know that it's because it was there and I was there and there was like nothing, like really no technological barrier between us, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah, it totally makes sense. Absolutely. What about phones? Some people have said they've had phones behave oddly, just like randomly call a number they didn't even think was still in their phone, stuff like that. It just behaving oddly.
I have never really experienced that. Uh, but just to be honest with you, there are so many things, that go on in the forest. And I'm gonna be honest, I have experienced a lot of weird things in the forest. And I can't necessarily say that they're Bigfoot related. And to be honest with you, I can't say that they're not Bigfoot related because there's just like really no explanation to them. I've seen the lights. I don't know if you've heard about that phenomenon, but I've seen the lights. I've heard the noises. And I've had some pretty close encounters. And, you know, there's just so many odd things that happen that nothing really surprises me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there are a lot of unusual reports. When you talk about the lights, a lot of people see the orbs, but I remember one person was discussing that, and they had an orb that was kind of a goldish color, I believe, and they heard something, and looked over that way, saw this orb, and they could see like an outline, I think, of a Bigfoot there. And then suddenly it was just all they saw was the orb. The orb just went up in the air and then it came back down and just poof went out, and they never did see the Bigfoot anymore. But that was strange.
The strangest encounter that I had with the lights, and I call them lights, and this is a different phenomenon than orbs. Uh, you can take a picture with a digital camera, and we had orbs all over those photos, whether it was day or night. And I mean, even in some like extreme temperatures, when I first saw the orbs in the photos, I said, okay, that's bugs. You're just getting insects that fly back and forth between the camera. And it just so happens that it looks like an orb. And then it was pretty cold that night. It was down into the 30s that night. And somebody took a picture at night and it was completely covered with orbs. And they said, what do you think about this? And I said, okay, that's not bugs. I don't know what that is. But we actually had encounters with like balls of light. And the lights were really weird because they didn't emit light. They had, they were lit. You could see them, but it wasn't like that it emitted light. You couldn't see the ground under it. It was just like all of that light was just right there in that ball. And they would be as big as, one of the bigger softballs, or maybe up to the size of a basketball. And they would float, and some of them would go higher than the trees, and they would bounce off of each other. When they were higher than the trees, they would just like bump into each other and bounce off, and bump into each other and bounce off. And I thought that was so bizarre. And we actually had one in, it was probably a little bit bigger than a softball, but it was about 4 feet off the ground. And it followed these guys through the woods. Everywhere they went, it went. If they made a sharp 90-degree turn, this ball of light made a sharp 90-degree turn. If they did a U-turn and headed back, that light did a U-turn and started heading back. It's like it was being controlled. It was like it was tracking them. And I have tried everything and I think the last time I saw these lights was like in 2013. So that's, like 12 years that I have tried everything that I can think of to explain it, and I can't. I started off with the explanation of foxfire, which foxfire is a bioluminescent mushroom that does grow in the United States. But as a bioluminescent mushroom, it doesn't float. So that kind of knocked a hole in that theory. Then my second theory was that the area that we was in was there was a lot of natural quartz in that area. And, quartz will kind of hold an electrical charge. And I thought that possibly that quartz might be discharging some of that electricity in the evenings, and it was supercharging swamp gases. Like we have a place not too far from here in Kentucky called Neon, Kentucky. And it kind of has the same phenomenon because it's natural neon in the air. And during the thunderstorm, that neon becomes charged and it glows and makes these balls. But I had to kind of come off the swamp gas theory because if it was swamp gas, it would all be the same color. And the lights that we saw were multiple colors. They were green, they were red, they were blue, they were white, they were orange, they were yellow, just all these different colors. And then I think my latest shot at trying to explain it was that with there being all that quartz there, that if you take two pieces of quartz and bang it together, it creates a really brilliant spark. Now, that spark is not hot enough to start a fire or anything, but it's just really bright. And I come up with the conclusion that possibly there was microscopic pieces of quartz in the air, and as the wind blowed, those microscopic pieces of quartz bang together and cause those lights. And then I had to knock a hole in that theory because the wind wasn't blowing most of the time when we saw them. So I honestly have no idea what they were.
Yeah, that's
But it,
strange. I don't think I'd heard about something like moving in those the 90-degree angles or whatever and tracking people. I don't think I'd heard of that one before. Now I have heard of rods, really intelligent, like moving rods through the woods, and they would move in a way that they knew that not to run into a tree. It wasn't like they were passing through trees or anything, but they would move in a methodical way as if they knew where they were going.
yeah, I'll be honest with you, Linda. I actually saw one of the lights that I was just describing form, and it just started on the ground, and it just started glowing. And it was when it started, it might have been about the size of my little finger, the top of my little finger right there, just about that big, and it was blue. And it got bigger, it got bigger, and it got bigger, and it got up about the size of a softball, and it started floating. And the guy that was with me, he looked over at me and he said, "What is that?" And I said, "Dude, I don't know." And he said, "What are we going to do?" And I said, "I don't know about you, but I'm going to get the hell out of here." And I left. I had absolutely no explanation for it, but I actually seen it start. And that was, I can't explain it. It's just like it came out of the ground.
And it may have, I mean, it may be some natural resource in the ground that makes this light. I mean, we really, it's not explainable right now, I
Yeah.
guess.
And that's one of the things too. I can't say that it's necessarily related to Bigfoot because the area that we was in, I'm gonna be honest with you, that particular area is like the hottest spot that I have ever been for Bigfoot evidence. Every time we was there was activity, and it wasn't like it was just a little bit of activity. It was a lot of activity,
Yeah.
and
Has,
I
has
think,
anyone has anyone measured any radiation there or anything like that?
no, ma'am, I don't think so. But
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you, for real. I don't know because, like I said, that one started just right in front of me, and I believe if it had, a pretty high radiation to it, that I would have been affected. And I have never had any type of radiation burns or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I
So
understand. So
it's interesting.
what do you think about mind speak?
Wow, that is such a tough one. And I, we talked about this a bit when I interviewed you for the show that'll be on tonight. That I don't take anything away from anybody's encounter. Okay, if you tell me that you heard Bigfoot speak and you heard it in your mind, I kind of have to believe that because I wasn't there to experience it. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you can kind of rule things out. Were you drinking? Well, yeah, I'd had a few drinks. So you see what I'm saying? That can kind of rule it out. But I'm going to be honest with you. Like one of the people that I respect a lot, and he's pretty famous, just to be honest with you, Les Stroud, the Survivor Man. To do the things that he does, you have to have a really strong mental fortitude to start with. Survival, when it comes to survival is quite a bit mental over physical. And I've always really kind of thought Les Stroud was a really good dude because he goes out and he does it by himself. He doesn't have a camera crew, he doesn't have anything. He's out there just doing it by himself. And Les Stroud had a an episode of Mind Speak in the Great Smoky Mountains. And I really don't know what to make of that. Uh, and Les Stroud made a good point about it when he described it. Uh, he said, usually when you think to yourself, the voice that you hear in your mind is your own. And he said, this was not my voice. this was a completely different voice that spoke to me. So I really don't know what to make of it. Uh, I've never had it happen to me. And I guess it's kind of one of those things that, until it really does like happen to you, you really can't get a feel for it.
Yeah, it would be complicated, I would imagine, if someone had never heard that before and it was so distinctly different, like you're describing it with him. It would stand out because it's a like a different voice. Yeah.
And I'm not going to say that it's not possible because I can't be for sure that it's not possible. Uh, I mean, there's been all kinds of human experiments with mind control and telekinesis and all these other things. Even the government has done that. And you know, I kind of look at it like this: if there's enough for the government to try to think, hey, that this works and we need to test it out, there's probably something to it.
That's true. So what do you think the government knows about this and why do you think they're not coming forward with it?
I'll be honest, I think the government knows quite a bit about Bigfoot. I think they have actually studied Bigfoot quite a bit. I think they have specimens and things like that. And they won't let it out. I think, and they'll go back to the whole panic in the population thing. And I don't think that it's necessarily going to panic the public. I think a lot of people would be really interested in knowing that it's out there. But I think one of the reasons, probably the main reason that they don't let it out, is it's going to actually economically affect a lot of governmental things. And people's like, oh, do you mean it would affect logging, kind of like with the spotted owl and things like that? No, I really don't think it would affect logging or anything like that. I think the biggest industries that would be hurt by the government coming out and say, hey, we do have a 8 foot tall, 1,200 pound hominid living in the forests of North America. And the things that I think it would hurt the camping industry in like all these national parks. Okay, people will camp with bears and things like that in Yellowstone, but you know, I don't think they would camp if there was a chance that there could be a Bigfoot in the area. I think it would hurt not only the camping industry. I think it would hurt hunting and fishing in those areas. I think it would hurt a lot of the local economies. I think it could shut down places like, if they can come out and say, oh, well, we have so many Bigfoot that live in Yellowstone National Park, they're going to have to give those animals that much room to exist and survive and set aside, territories and things for them. And that's going to cut into huge swaths of land. Because I just be honest with you, I think that a Bigfoot may have a home range of 60, 70 miles. And that's a lot of territory when you think about it. And I don't know. I think the government will keep it secret because they can't afford to put up the protection for it, set aside land for it, and then have the industries like camping, fishing, and hunting and all these national parks just evaporate overnight. I just don't think they could survive that.
What do you think about this missing 411? Do you think Bigfoot has anything to do with people going missing in the national parks?
And I'll say this: uh, I don't think it's just Bigfoot. And people are automatically going to think, oh, he's going to go off on some crazy tangent. But no, I don't think it is just Bigfoot. I think Bigfoot does have a part to do with it. But I think a lot of it too might be just normal everyday circumstances. Someone who's not familiar with the area and steps off of a cliff and falls, never gets found. I think it might have to do with somebody's really ill prepared and they do not pack enough water and they start dehydrating. And when you dehydrate, you go through some pretty severe mental changes, and they just kind of freak out and wander off because they're dehydrated. But yeah, I actually do think that Bigfoot probably does play a small part in it. When you think about it, if you come up on a mother bear that has cubs, you are in the danger zone. And if you was to come up on a mother Sasquatch with a juvenile with her, I don't necessarily think you're in the danger zone. I think that you might be in the dead zone. I don't think you're going to come back from that. So yeah, I do believe they play a small part, but not as big a part as some of the shows and things want you to believe.
Well, some of the Native American legends have it that, that Bigfoot would come and get children and women and, take them away. Um, I don't know how much of that's true or how much of it was just a legend that to scare people to stay in close to the camp. I don't know for sure, but I've heard of that.
Yeah, you had I think her name was Juniqua, and she's part of they're up in Canada. I can't remember. Tom Seawood. I don't know if you've ever heard of Tom Seawood.
Yeah, he's been on my show.
Yeah, Tom gives some good descriptions of Juniqua and her spruce root basket and how she carries kids off. And even like I said, I'm part Cherokee Indian, and the Cherokee had a tale that there was two types of Bigfoot. One lived with the Cherokee Indians, and the other hunted Cherokees and killed them and lived off of them. But in that legend of the one that hunted and killed the Cherokee Indians, that it ate their brains and their liver. And I thought that was really, really oddly specific, that it ate this section and this section. And it just so happens that your brain and your liver are probably the fattiest two organs in your body. And if you're trying to survive in the woods, fat is one of the main things that you need to survive. And I just always thought that was oddly specific, that they said it ate the brain and the liver. So yeah, I do believe, there is some hunting that goes on, that people do get taken. But I don't think it's as much as, like I said, some people want us to believe. Uh, and then, you have like these little kids, and I can't think of the little boy's name, but he was gone for, I think, gosh, it was a while, maybe 7 days in the forest. And when they found him, he was mildly malnourished, but it wasn't bad. And he wasn't dehydrated. He had been, drinking. And he said that there was a big bear that took care of him. And when you think of that, the odds on that are really slim. That an actual honest to God bear took care of this kid and fed him and showed him where to get water at. So, you know, I think the possibilities out there.
Yeah, I've heard stories where Bigfoot kind of came and kind of rescued the day. There was this one old guy that was out in he had some health issues and he was out in a wooded area where Bigfoot was known to be out that way. And he passed out. He didn't know what happened. And when he came to, he was on his front porch, laying on his front porch, and there were Bigfoot tracks in his front yard. And he to
Mm-hmm.
this day he'll say, he believes that Bigfoot picked him up and brought him home and put him on the porch.
Yeah, I've heard several stories like that. I think one of the weirdest ones, and I don't like to name drop other shows, but it was on Sasquatch Chronicles. But it was an English lady, and she had observed a couple of Sasquatch on the beach, and she had fainted. And I don't know if you've ever listened to Sasquatch Chronicles, but she's the lady that said she knows what a bears looks like, and there is no way these things were bears. But she had passed out, and when she passed out, As she come to, she was all the way back up to her car. So obviously, one of those Bigfoot had dragged her back up to her car and left her there. So I think it's it's kind of more in the realm of there are some gosh, I hate to say this because it really adds some humanity to it, and that's not necessarily what I want to do. But it's just like people. You run into some people that are actually good people and helpful and things like that, and then there's some people that are just bad. And I think it's the same way with Bigfoot. I think some of them are really not out to cause any harm or anything like that, and I think some of them do have the agenda to where they want to cause harm. I think it just kind of depends on what animal you run into.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Well, I want to thank you for joining me, Jace. Anything else you want to leave the audience with?
Uh, just basically, like I said, if you're interested in it, go out and look for it. Uh, and it's wonderful. You're spending time in the woods. You're enjoying yourself. You're doing something that you like, and it's healthy for you. It's good for you. Get out and walk around a little bit. Uh, don't sit and watch every episode of Finding Bigfoot or this Bigfoot show or that Bigfoot show or whatever Bigfoot show. If you're really interested in it, get out there and do some research. Get out and put some boots on the ground and walk around a little bit, and look and see what you can find. That's the best advice I can give anybody.
Yeah, you're not going to see one sitting at home in your chair, probably.
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
Well, I want to thank you for joining me today, and I'm going to go ahead and end our interview today. But I really appreciate it,
Oh, yes, ma'am. I had a good time. I really enjoyed it.
and I want to invite all of the audience to please, please, please like, share, subscribe. We want to keep this channel going.